Alright, welcome back. Time for my power rankings for the 2024 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Not a fantastic race, I thought, but still, it was an interesting race. There were some interesting storylines throughout that whole weekend. So, starting right away with number 20, out-qualified and out-raced by his teammate, and the first crash in a race this season, Lance Stroll. So for Stroll, tricky qualifying session. Actually set his fastest time in qualifying in Q1 and not Q3. So I think maybe if he gets that sorted out, he might have some better performances in qualifying. Q3 kind of bungled his last run, so ended up starting 10th. And then, of course, crashed into the wall lap 7. Not a big mistake, but still, it was a mistake with very big consequences. And I think, depending on which strategy he decided to do for the race, he could have ended up with a nice haul of points today. But unfortunately, no points today, and it just kind of leaves Aston Martin further, even more and more isolated in the Constructors' Championship. Number 19, I'm going to go with Daniel Ricciardo, outraced and out-qualified by his teammate Yuki Tsunoda. So apparently he was actually pretty close to Tsunoda during qualifying, except for his very last run, which has then had that half-second gap. Nonetheless, not a great race for Ricciardo. In the race, I think he had a very, very long pit stop, of course. I'm not holding that against him, but and then had that silly little spin towards the end of the weekend, the end of the race. So overall, not a great race for Ricciardo. Definitely a weekend to forget for him. All right, number 18. I'm gonna go with Zhou. So for Zhou Guangyu, out-qualified and out-raced by Bottas. Of course, he had that crash in FP3, which, of course, not really one of the competitive sessions. But that crash meant that he didn't have the mechanics were not able to repair his car in time for qualifying, and that basically meant he was forced to start from the back of the grid. So his race was really compromised from there. And if he had had a really good qualifying session, perhaps he would have been the driver to get that point today. So obviously we don't know for sure, but nonetheless, not a great race for him, of course. And he was the victim of another Sauber pit stop, 20-second pit stop or so. So again, not a great race for Zhou. Number 17, Logan Sargent. So for Sargent, not a whole lot to say. Out-qualified and out-raced by his teammate Alex Albon. The gap was quite sizable, I think 4 tenths or so. So he's gonna not want a repeat of that in the coming races. And the race kind of anonymous, not a whole lot to say in that regard. But yeah, finished behind his teammate there as well. All right, number 16. Kevin Magnussen. So while Magnussen did provide some very interesting entertainment for us today, he also, and while he did have a massive role in his teammate Nico Hülkenberg getting a point today, that could have been his point, not his teammates. Without the 10-second penalty for the collision with Albon, which deserved or not, the F1 TV people seem to think it was a bit harsh, but I do feel like there's a trend where instead of giving out 5-second penalties, they're going with harsher 10-second penalties, which I think after some of the complaints from last year where drivers would knock another driver out of the race and they would only end up with a 5-second penalty, I think I'm fine with them having harsher penalties for these kinds of incidents. The incident with Tsunoda where he basically just went off track and didn't give the position back, that's totally on him. I'm not sure that's really arguable. It's basically, in my books, it's a slam dunk penalty. Made the overtake, didn't make the corner, and then kept the position. So, that's pretty much a slam dunk, but still really, really solid defensive driving for Magnussen. Technically out-qualified his teammate as well, but I have an asterisk next to that because his teammate didn't set a lap time in Q2. In Q1, where they both competed, Hülkenberg actually set the better time, but yeah, very, very close there. All right, number 15, driver who didn't even do anything today. And that is Pierre Gasly. Reported gearbox issues on the formation lap, and then retired after the first lap. So not really a whole lot to say. He was out-qualified by Ocon in qualifying. The margin was very, very small, so not really much of a criticism there. So yeah, that's all for Gasly. Number 14, I'm going to go with Valtteri Bottas. Out-qualified and out-raced his teammate this weekend. That being said, pretty anonymous weekend, not a whole lot to say. I feel like he had a really strange strategy, did a two-stopper, I think, which is why he finished, I think, second last. Not a whole lot to say other than the pace of the Sauber didn't look particularly strong this weekend. and he's just going to be hoping for better results in the coming rounds. All right, number 13. I'm going to go with Esteban Ocon. Out-qualified and outraced his teammate. Not a bad weekend, I thought, for Ocon. The margin qualifying between himself and Gasly very, very close. We know they're quite close together in terms of performance. In the race, he was part of that battle behind Magnussen. And we know the race pace of the Alpine, at least for now, is pretty poor. So the fact that he was at least in that battle, just right behind Albon, I think is a decent enough job for this weekend. All right, number 12. I'm going to go with Lewis Hamilton. Out-qualified and outraced by his teammate George Russell. For Hamilton, I think unfortunately this is 2 races in a row now where he's had a poor qualifying. Come out after qualifying in the press conference, say, we've gone with a race setup, we're going to be aggressive in the race, we're going to make up moves, we're going to make up positions. And second weekend in a row where that's kind of failed to materialize. So, for Hamilton, I'm not sure if this is going to be the beginning of a trend or it's just a coincidence that it's the first 2 races. Qualifying was pretty poor. He looked at points, it looked like he was going to be out-qualified by like 3 to 4 tenths by Russell. But the final run, I think Russell didn't improve on his last run, so that allowed the gap to be much smaller in the end. And in the race, decided to go with the risky strategy of not pitting under the safety car. And I think one of the reasons they decided to do that was because for both Norris and Hamilton, they were too close on track to their teammates, so that if they had gone into the pits and pit when everyone else did, there was a risk that they were going to be stuck much longer behind. Because of course their teammates being ahead of them, they would have had priority during the pit stop. So I don't know if that was part of the rationale, but nonetheless not a great race for Hamilton. Number 11, we go with Yuki Tsunoda. Out-qualified and outraced his teammate Daniel Ricciardo this weekend. The pace wasn't really there. I think there was points where if the battles between himself and K-Mag had turned out slightly differently, maybe he could have got fought for a point. But it feels very similar to the start of last season where he had a pretty strong start, but he was just missing out on points here and there. And I don't know if that's going to be a trend or if it's going to be just a reality for this year, that the car's not quite as quick as we thought during preseason testing, and it's just going to be kind of a struggle for the first part of the season until hopefully the first upgrades come. But another decent weekend for Tsunoda. Out-qualified Ricciardo, beat Ricciardo in the race. That's exactly what he needs to be doing. If he wants to keep his seat for next year, or even if he wants to audition himself for a Red Bull seat next year, which I think at this point is still very, very slim odds, but never say never. Number 10, I'm going to go with Lando Norris. Not a great weekend from him. Out-qualified and outraced by his teammate Oscar Piastri. This was a weekend last year that he also struggled with, so perhaps he doesn't like the track. But yeah, qualifying behind Piastri in all 3 qualifying sessions, and then in the race, of course, like Hamilton, decided to go not pit under the safety car and try to stay there as long as possible and hope for a second safety car. That second safety car never came, of course, but still, yeah, the pace deficit is definitely going to be something that he's going to want to not make sure is a one-off and won't happen again in the coming races. And last year, one of his big advantage over Piastri was race pace. Qualifying pace the second half of last year, they were very, very close. So if Piastri is able to perform like he did this weekend, every single weekend, it's going to be very, very tough for Norris to kind of assert himself as the number 1 driver this year. All right, number 9, I'm going to go with Alex Albon. Out-qualifying and outraced his teammate Logan Sargent, and by a fair margin too, I think, as well, in the qualifying. But in the race, I thought he looked good. He, of course, finished 11th, first driver outside the points. And I think if K-Mag hadn't had such strong defensive driving, he may have been the one to get in the points instead. But I think nonetheless, a pretty decent weekend. I think he came on the post-race show afterwards saying it was a bit stronger than expected. I thought he did a decent job as well. I think for Albon, he's going to be, basically just trying to be in this position every race, where he's trying to be that best driver in the bottom 5 teams. I think he is one of the best drivers in that bottom 5 teams. So it's a position he should be in week in, week out. All right, number 8, I'm going to go with Nico Hülkenberg, the first driver from the bottom 5 teams to score a point this year. Pretty good, decent race for Hülkenberg, and I think he's probably going to be really happy that he can actually race this year and not just qualify well and then pray and hope like crazy that the tires don't die. So honestly, pretty good race, and the fact that he was able to hold on with those old tires, of course Magnussen being behind helped as well, but if Hülkenberg had if Hulkenberg had not been able to manage his tires as well as he did, it would have been impossible for Magnussen to drive slow enough to not be overtaken by the cars behind. So Hulkenberg did a really good part in earning that point as well, and of course recovering from a qualifying session where he basically got eliminated by his car. So it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if he had qualified and gotten into Q3. Like maybe he could have. I still think 10th was really the best they were going to do. I think they were 30 seconds or something off of. He was 30 seconds or so off of Hamilton. So yeah, massive gap there in race pace between the top 5 and the bottom 5. All right, number 7. I'm going to go with Sergio Perez. Decent race. I feel like you could easily put him a couple positions higher, but I feel like there were drivers ahead that I wanted to highlight. For Perez, I think another decent race. This is exactly what he needs to be doing. Got out qualified by Verstappen by a reasonable amount. I don't really expect him to out-qualify Verstappen, and got beaten by Verstappen in the race again by a reasonable amount. Finishing P2 is again exactly what he needs to be doing, bagging those points for the Constructors' Championship. And as things stand, I think they're looking to be in really good shape to finish with another 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship in a really easy constructor style. So we'll see how that goes, but the next 2 races coming up for Perez, Australia and Japan, are going to be really, really important because those are races that he did really poorly at last year. Of course, if you remember, he crashed in qualifying in Australia, recovered to 5th, and then in Japan last year it was an absolute shocker. I think he crashed into Magnussen, retired with some kind of mechanical issue as well because of that damage. So yeah, shocker in Japan last year. These are 2 tracks that he didn't do very well at last year, so I think it'll be very important that he has a good result, and a podium basically would be a good result at those 2 tracks. Okay, so number 6. So coming into the season, I think many people thought, oh well, we don't have any rookies, how boring. But it turns out we have a rookie this year, and his name is Oliver Behrman. Makes his F1 debut at the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix with Ferrari, and I thought he did a really good job. Qualifying, I think, probably the best he could have expected. Maybe getting into the bottom of Q3 I think would have been nice, but that being said, I think coming in first time at a very difficult track, I thought he did a really good job in that respect. The race kept it clean. Only did 1 overtake on track, which I think was on Hulkenberg, but other than that, I think the tire management and race pace was really, really solid. I know the Ferrari's a bit stronger than the McLaren and the Mercedes, but still finished within 20 seconds of Leclerc, which is honestly not too terrible. And given the lack of preparation, the fact that he's a rookie, I thought, really good job. And he did an excellent job of auditioning himself for a F1 seat in 2025. And given the fact that he's going to be doing, he was already expected to do 6 free practice sessions with Haas this year, I already think he has a very good chance of getting a Haas seat for next year. Alright, number 5, out qualifying and out racing his teammate, George Russell. So for Russell, I think decent weekend, another weekend beating Hamilton, both qualifying and the race, which is definitely harder said than done. I think the Mercedes were struggling quite a bit in the corners. Their straight line speed was quite impressive this weekend, but just the cornering was really, really tough. And I think Russell did a good job to get the points that he did. I believe in 6. Yeah, 6 points he did. So yeah, good result for Russell. Number 4, I have Fernando Alonso out qualified and out raced Lance Stroll, which of course not the most difficult of tasks, but still I thought a really good weekend for Alonso. Coming into the qualifying and the race, the data from free practice suggested that the Aston Martins were really suffering with race pace. So the fact that Alonso managed a 5th place I believe, after his 4th place in qualifying, I think is a really strong result, and it's something that he and the team will be really happy about. That being said, I think the battle in the Constructors' Championship isn't really going to be as critical for the team this year as it was last year, where they obviously had points in fighting with Mercedes and Ferrari and McLaren at different points in the season. I do feel like they're kind of going to be left to drift in 5th, but I think they'll be close to the Mercedes and the McLaren, but I think they're obviously going to be miles and miles clear of the bottom 5 teams. But still, nonetheless, really good result for Alonso. Number 3, I'm going to go with Oscar Piastri. Out qualified and out raced his teammate Lando Norris. Really good result for today. Had really strong pace. It would have been nice to see him overtake Lewis Hamilton on track, but I feel like with the way that unfortunately the McLaren, similar to last year, quite draggy, not the best straight line speed. I think that at the end of the day, that really hindered them. I think if he had been in free air, he might have put a bit more of a challenge on Charles Leclerc for the final podium position. But still, I think at the end of the day, he'll still be pretty satisfied with that result. All right, number 2, I'm going to go with Charles Leclerc. Pretty strong weekend from him. First podium of the season. Out-qualified and outraced his teammate for this weekend, Oliver Behrman. But of course, that's to be expected from every driver on the grid, replacing basically a substitute driver, like competing against a substitute driver. That being said, I think race pace was decent. Was well clear of Piastri in 4th. Wasn't really able to challenge Perez too heavily, but tried the best he could. Tried to get that really strong start at the beginning of the race to take P2, but unfortunately lost that position several laps. He lost P2, retook the position, and then lost, I think, on lap 4. But reality is, at this point, none of the other cars can compete with Red Bull, not even Perez's Red Bull. And of course, number 1, I think another very, very solid weekend is Max Verstappen. Won the race from pole, didn't get a Grand Chelem this weekend. He looked, without the safety car, he might have been able to get another Grand Chelem, but I think that would have been pretty embarrassing, I would say, for the sport if Verstappen's getting Grand Chelems, Grand Slams every single weekend. Really strong weekend, not a whole lot to add. Apparently he came on the radio saying that the tires were actually too cold. So that is something to watch with the Red Bulls, I think, in races that were maybe perhaps in the wet, or even in tracks where for whatever reason we have really low temperatures. The Red Bull does seem to have some issues getting temperature into the tires. So that's something definitely to watch this year. I think nonetheless, Verstappen best driver this weekend, I think, is definitely not really much of a question at this point. I do know Behrman won driver of the day with 43% of the vote or whatever it was, but still I do feel like just in terms of performance overall, I do feel like Verstappen was the best driver. So that's all for my power rankings for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Thanks so much for watching. Next F1 race is in 2 weeks' time, the Australian Grand Prix. Goodbye.